Hi, I'm Allie West, and I'm going to be talking about surveillance in the newly legalized marijuana industry. So I became interested in this topic when I went with my family to visit my 23-year-old brother, who recently moved to Denver. And my mom was very interested in the weed dispensaries that we were passing because she wasn't used to seeing them. And she asked if my brother could take my 16-year-old brother and I into one of the dispensaries. And he responded and said that he couldn't because there's always a police officer at the door checking IDs to make sure you're 21 and over. And this got me thinking about the surveillance um, in dispensaries now that marijuana is legalized. And as I did more research, I realized that there's a lot more surveillance that goes into the industry than just the dispensaries. So for this presentation, I'm going to start off with the history of marijuana usage, the current practices and purpose of surveilling marijuana, and how those practices can be used to discriminate against certain communities. So to begin, marijuana has been used for many years recreationally and illegally. Um, Starting in the 1900s, police really started to crack down on individuals using marijuana. Author Phil Nicholas writes in the journal Contemporary Drug Problems in 2012 that in the 1950s, marijuana consumption was believed to lead to heroin use and thus was often treated similar to heroin by many legislatures and law enforcement agencies. And in the same source, Congress passed the Boggs Act in 1951, creating a sentencing guideline of 2 to 5 years for first-time drug offenders, but did not allow for probation or suspended sentence. So this goes to show that not a lot was known about marijuana and what it could do to someone, but it was compared to the use of hard drugs. And author and analyst in illicit crime use Lisa Sacco writes in a U.S. congressional document in 2014 that while drug-related investigations and prosecutions remain a priority for federal enforcement, the Obama administration has suggested efforts will be harnessed against large-scale trafficking organizations rather than on recreational users of marijuana. So there was a shift between targeting individuals who were smoking and using marijuana products and focusing more on big organizations that were trafficking drugs against through borders and into U.S. gangs. So this leads to the current practices of marijuana surveillance. A lot of the laws have changed since medical marijuana was legalized in 1999 and recreational marijuana use was legalized in 2012. And there's still a lot of debate between states and the FDA on how marijuana should be regulated because we haven't really had this in a long time where states have legalized a drug besides alcohol, so there's a lot of debate right now. But one way that it is surveilled is through state laws and the FDA. And Sarah Klieger says in the journal Society for the Study of Addiction in 2017 that as patients' needs for a clearly defined dose of an uncontaminated product became more apparent and the federal non-interference policy took shape, state medical marijuana laws began to address FDA type issues explicitly, such as source and product safety. So since marijuana use is not legalized statewide, there's a lot of variance between how states regulate marijuana use and how the FDA does, which leads to there needs to be more conversation between states and the FDA so that it can be more clear on who can get access, how they can, and where they can. Another way in which marijuana use is surveilled or was tried to be surveilled by was through making marijuana offenses a low priority law. Research done by Amanda Ross and published in the journal Contemporary Economic Policy in 2016 found that overall their findings indicate that even though police devoted fewer resources towards arresting an individual for misdemeanor marijuana offenses, there was no measurable impact on deterring more serious, violent, and property crimes through lower crime rates or higher clearance rates. So the so the reason people wanted to have marijuana offenses become a low priority law was to free up resources for police officers to spend more time on more dangerous, higher risk criminal acts. But the research found that it actually wouldn't save a lot of resources or reduce crime rates. Um, so although the research maybe didn't have the results that they were hoping for, it definitely opens up the conversation for how laws can change. And then the third way that marijuana usage is surveilled is through stop and frisk. And as we talked about in class, stop and frisk is a police method that has very few regulations and boundaries. And David Keenan writes in an article published by the Yale Law Journal in 2014 that observation of small amounts of marijuana or detection of marijuana odor does not adequately support the influence that an individual or the inference that an individual is engaged in criminal activity. So, because there are so few regulations and boundaries, this can definitely lead to police officers having racial biases and allows those biases and discrimination to thrive. And this leads into the last part of the speech about how surveillance of marijuana can target certain communities. And for starters, marijuana dispensaries are often located in areas of poverty. And Carla Berg says in her article posted in the journal Addictive Behaviors in 2018 that recent research has also documented that both medical and recreational marijuana retailers in Colorado were more likely to locate in neighborhoods that had a lower proportion of young people, had a higher crime rate, or had a higher density of on-premise alcohol outlets. So because these marijuana dispensaries are being located in communities of poverty, it makes them more likely to use it and more likely to get in trouble for it. And because these marijuana dispensaries are being located in areas of poverty, that also means that it's being located in areas of minorities. And Zane Umstead provides the statistic in his article published in the Iowa Law Review in 2014. The ACLU discovered that African Americans are 3.73 times more likely than white Americans to be arrested for marijuana possession nationwide, despite nearly equivalent marijuana usage between African and white Americans. So this leads Umstead to question, why are African Americans more likely to get caught and in trouble for marijuana usage? And he believes it's because of police discrimination and biasing. Daniel Bergner wrote in his article published in The Atlantic in 2014 that when he questioned a police officer about the discrimination, the police officer responded that it's not racially driven profiling, it's crime-driven profiling. And this is just crazy to think that police officers, if this is how police officers think and understand crime, then it can definitely allow for racial biasing and discrimination to continue. So in conclusion, marijuana usage is not a new concept. It's definitely been prevalent in the United States for many years, but recently with the laws changing and legalizing medical marijuana and recreational use marijuana, we've found that a lot of laws have to change. The state laws and FDA have to change a lot of laws, and how police surveil marijuana also has changed, and through the use of stop and frisk or trying out low priority laws, and the ways that police are changing to regulate marijuana usage can create racial biasing and discrimination. So this research made it clear to me that more conversations need to be had between those making the laws and those protecting the laws when it comes to marijuana usage, and how these decisions and actions can affect minorities and target communities. Thank you.